is constantly like, something's wrong here, right? What's wrong with this other captain, right? Why can't he walk around? Why does he always seem so feeble? And it's almost like a detective story in a way. And you come to find out that it's because the slaves were running the ship the entire time, right? It was a big act that they were putting on. That's an interesting story. I mean, it shows how slave and master dynamics are almost flipped. It shows how that's flipped upside down, right? I think, which is a really interesting thing. The only other time we saw something like that was with Douglas, right? With Mr. Covey, right? Remember when Douglas overcame Mr. Covey in their wrestling match or whatever? Like the dynamic between master and slave swapped then, right? Where Covey knew he no longer had any power. So Benito Sereno is definitely an interesting story about what happened, what could happen, right? The dangers of slave uprisings, that type of thing. That's something that they were very scared about in antebellum America, right? You guys might know Nat Turner led a famous slave uprising in 1832. Right? But there was a bunch of other ones as well, especially in the 1850s with the law saying that slaves could be transported back down to the South from the North. Right? All kinds of uprisings. They were definitely scared of it. That story does a pretty good job showing that, I think. Melville's good at subtlety, right? He beats you over the head with details, but at the same time, he's subtle about his overall message, right? It's not really preachy per se. So that's something that I've always appreciated about Melville.
I like the wittiness. It kind of has that same kind of wittiness that Bartleby does in a way. It's kind of like comedic value, but it's like subtle comedic. I don't know. It's not like he's been comedic in a nonchalant way or something like that. I don't.
Yeah, very dry humor almost.
Yeah.
Right. Yeah, he's the master. He's the master of that type of style, right? The mundane style.
I like that.
Yeah. He doesn't have glowing sentences, right? His sentences almost read very clunkily sometimes. Like his style isn't simple and smooth, butter smooth. It's very rough and compared to Hawthorne style, right, though, which is full of fancy $10 words, right? Melville's more down to earth, it feels like.
Yeah.
Which if you read Moby Dick, you might change your mind on that. Yeah, just think about how much Moby Dick has shaped their culture, though. I'm sitting here drinking a Starbucks cup at the moment. And where did that name Starbuck come from? The character in Moby Dick, right? So, his influence over our literature is vast. He's only becoming more and more entrenched. Melville's pretty much become our Shakespeare, right, as far as like the great writers go. I would make that claim safely, right? If you study American literature in any detail, he's the main man. I just wanted to say a few things about that. As far as these poems go, this is the little bit of literature we get during the Civil War. Excuse me, as the Civil War was going on. Of course, I've given you guys a lot of context all semester as far as what led to the Civil War. I mean, mostly slavery, right? But the states thought that they had the right to own slaves, right? And the federal government had no say in that. Um, it was two different Americas, right? The America of the North was a manufacturing society, right? This was a society made of factories. In the South, it was an agricultural society, right? Mostly not even for food, but for stuff like cotton and tobacco and whatnot. So most of the money in the country was made in the South. I don't want to give you guys too much of a history lesson on the Civil War. That's more of a exercise for history class. You guys probably know the Civil War was extremely bloody, mostly because of new innovations in weaponry and things like that. You had these. The rifles they had was a step up over the muskets that they had in like the Revolutionary period. But of course, they had cannon. They had these big artillery for the first time, right? But the biggest thing that killed most people during the Civil War wasn't actually, getting shot. A lot of people died in the Civil War from disease and infection. You had these guys who would get a simple flesh wound, and then it would get infected, and then they would get gangrene, and then the limbs would have to be cut off, right? They didn't have antibiotics to give these soldiers during the Civil War. Antibiotics wouldn't come around until about 20 years later. Antibiotics is also what got rid of cholera. Right? That's why we don't have cholera anymore, because of antibiotics. Thank God for that, because cholera is a bad way to go. But just think about all the devastation, all the people who died needlessly, just because, of lackluster medical care that they had. But just to give you a few spark notes on the war, the South kicked the North's butt for most of the war. Right? You guys all know about like Robert E. Lee, Stonewall Jackson, right? Those guys were very talented military minds. Like there's probably very few generals in all of history who can match Robert E. Lee as far as pure strategy goes. The South, as far as manpower, did not have anywhere near the manpower that the North had. And of course, the North has a lot of big cities. Right? So you guys know big cities, there's lots of population. So these are urban centers, there's just simply more people to fight. The South, it was mostly just the good old boys, right, living out in the country. They were fighting a war for the rich plantation owners, right? That's pretty much. So like I told you guys before, the everyday Confederate soldier, they didn't have slavery on the mind probably because they didn't have slaves, right? They were just poor farmers. But they were fighting for their region and their hometowns and all this stuff. Kind of like how we're very loyal to our hometowns and whatnot. But these good old boys just completely kicked the crap out of the North for the first 3 years of the war. The North had very ineffectual leadership. The generals that we had, like Lincoln, kept having to replace generals over and over and over because none of them would do what was necessary. They were all very cautious. The most famous one was General McClellan. He actually ran against Lincoln in 1864 because Lincoln fired him and he got mad. So he decided he was going to run for president against him. Right? But he was a famously cautious general, right? There was lots of times where he could have won the battles, but he was afraid. He was just very cautious. He didn't want to make a chess move that was too aggressive, so to speak. So for the first 3 years of the war, it looked pretty dire. 1863, they finally won No, I think it was 1862. The end of 1862, they finally won a big battle called Antietam, the Battle of Antietam. You guys can, Antietam was the single bloodiest day in American history as far as casualties. I think there was like 30 or 40,000 casualties on that one day. Gettysburg had more casualties overall, but Gettysburg was spread out over 3 days. But that battle was like a stalemate, pretty much. Lee had actually invaded Pennsylvania and Maryland. Antietam's in Maryland. So Lee had actually invaded north for the first time. And they drove them back. They drove them back into Virginia. So they considered that a big win. So at that point, Lincoln issued the Emancipation Proclamation. And he said, by executive decree, all slaves are now free. That didn't really mean anything, right? That didn't hold a lot as far as the law went, but it was more or less like a symbolic gesture more than anything else. Which later, 2 years later, they would free the slaves with I think it's the 17th Amendment, right, where they freed the slaves. We just celebrated the day a couple of weeks ago. I think it's the 17th. Correct me if I'm wrong.
Yeah,
I might be.
Dave Lord, he said that I haven't looked into that day, but he was saying that day was the day that the slaves had finally realized they were free. He said he was saying it took, I don't know if he was full of it or what, but he said it took a while for word to get around. I don't know how true that was, but
well, I mean, even after they freed the slaves were now pretty much like, now what? Right? What do we do now? Right? Everything we know is on this plantation we own, or where we work on. So a lot of them just stayed on and earned pennies for doing the same labor they always did because they didn't know any different.
They lived there. I mean, they would have been homeless, I guess. They'd have just left a plantation.
Right. And a lot of slaves stuck around in the South, former slaves. They were still pretty much slaves in all but name. Right? There was a lot of that went on after the war. Eventually, there was a great migration of African Americans north. So like now, you have big cities like Chicago, for instance, right? You know, a lot of former slaves families moved up north to big cities like Chicago and New York, or moved westward. But that took a while. That was probably up in about the 1880s before that started happening a lot. So yeah, they freed the slaves, but like, now what? Right? What do we do now? That was kind of the position that they were put into. And it didn't help. It didn't help that the president who took over after Lincoln, Andrew Johnson, really didn't do much to change the country. You guys might have heard the term Reconstruction before. Lincoln had this big elaborate plan for like rebuilding the South. He didn't want the South to be such a big agricultural powerhouse anymore. Like, he wanted to change their entire culture from the ground up. But of course, you guys know his death happened. After that, they just kind of wavered and kept the South the same way that it was. Right? So only in the 20th century did you really start to see big cities springing up in the South, like Atlanta and New Orleans and Miami and big cities like that. Only in the 20th century did those cities really start to pick up. So I
wrote a paper. I wrote a paper on the Reconstruction, and that was his big, like, if I'm not mistaken, that was his big, like, political, trying to sell people, but he never really said what Reconstruction was going to consist of, and no one really knew what what it meant.
Yeah, pretty much just happened where the country just went back to normal. Like they invited all the states back into the Senate after they were in the Confederacy. Um, like that didn't limit they still had incredible power as far as Congress and stuff goes. The only reason why but they were able to pass the amendment outlawing slavery, by the way, was because the southern states had not yet took their seats back. Right. So they passed the amendment while the southern states were conveniently gone before the war had officially concluded. So you can imagine if they would have tried it 1 year later, it wouldn't have worked. They would have fought the war for nothing. Imagine getting to the end of that war and then you still have slavery, right? That almost happened. Right? All that destruction would have been for nothing. Yeah, as far as the end of the war goes, you guys all know General Grant. Right? Lincoln eventually gave General Grant power. Well, General Grant wasn't really a very talented general necessarily, but he did realize one thing: I've got a lot more men than Lee does. So like in these battles and stuff, Lee would have the tactical advantage, but Grant would just throw so many men at Lee that it became overwhelming. Right? So lots of Northern casualties, but Grant realized that, hey, we got the advantage. We got more men. Why are we wafering around here? Let's just throw all the men at them and we'll win. That's pretty much how it went. That's how the war ended in a 5-minute spark note here. Grant had more guys. He realized that. Nobody else got the memo. And then the North started winning in 1864 after he took over. So, yeah, just this quick memo on the Civil War. You guys all know it's still widely influential. I mean, just go next door to Virginia. Right? You see Civil War battlefields everywhere. I mean, it still has a place in our popular culture. I mean, just look at all the pro-Confederate stuff you see even around here, right? It always amuses me to see Confederate flags flying around here. I'm like, hey, dumbass, you realize that West Virginia was not a Confederate state, right? Right.
My mom lives in Georgia. Like I don't think they believe they lost the war. Like, I think they think this how.
The South will rise again. Right?
I mean, Hank Williams had a whole song about it.
Yeah, if the South would have won, we'd have it made. That was his.
God.
I think Hank was a little tongue in cheek with it though. Like I don't think he completely believed everything in that song. It's a very funny song. Yeah, I mean West Virginia. There's actually an argument about West Virginia because Lincoln separated it from Virginia in 1863. Right? There's actually a debate. Did Lincoln really have the power to do that? Did he have the power to make West Virginia a separate state from Virginia during the war? There's a whole constitutional debate about it. I'm going to get political here, okay? Donald Trump's court appointee, Amy Coney Barrett, thinks that West Virginia should not be a state. She thinks it was illegal for Lincoln to have done that. So yeah, make of that what you will. She wrote a big paper about how West Virginia is not really a state. We still should be part of Virginia. So, right, that's my thought on that argument. That's who he put on the court. So she's going to be on there for the next 30 years. Good job. Right. I'm loyal to my state in this case. Right? Damn it, we're a state.
Yeah.
We're not Virginia. and for good reason. Right?
And do you think it would be like a war within the state if he wouldn't have separated?
I think so. I mean, it was that violent. West Virginia was, there was lots of like little skirmishes and stuff here. It was very much like a frontier type battlefield situation. There's lots of guerrilla war and stuff that happened in West Virginia during the Civil War. Yeah, I mean, you could make the argument maybe you would have been better off if we still were part of Virginia, right? You could make that argument, but screw it. We're glad we're not part of them, right? So let's hope that nobody sues and says West Virginia shouldn't be a state anymore. The Supreme Court might say they're right. Anyway, as far as these poems go, you see, especially with Walt Whitman, this is the main thing I want to briefly discuss. Especially with Walt Whitman, you guys will probably see a little bit of a different flavor of Walt Whitman here, with his battle piece, with his Civil War poems. His Elegy to Lincoln, when lilacs last and the dooryard bloom, is a very famous poem. It's a very beautiful elegy, I think. But his poems took on a bit of a different tone, I think, during the war. He became very much a different poet. You guys all know, as far as we read the Song of Myself, you guys know how he was in that, right? He was very hopeful. He was a poet of all the people. He represented everybody, right? Of all races and sexualities and things like that. Well, Whitman actually worked as a nurse during the Civil War. He worked as a nurse at these Civil War hospitals. So he saw a lot of this death and destruction that was going on, people dying needlessly from infections and whatnot. So his poems definitely take a bit of a harsher tone here compared to what they were before. So I don't know. What did you guys note that? Did you note that these seem like very much different types of poems compared to what we had read before?
Yeah, it's Sydney. She thought he was perverted, so I don't. There's no perversion in this. It was more beautiful. It was.
Or even like taking on harsher subjects, right? It's very much a different tone, I think. Did you like these better than Song of Myself, Sydney?
No, I hate poetry with a passion. I don't know. I just can't understand it the way that a lot of other people can. Like, just the wording and the overall meaning that they're trying to get just doesn't comprehend.
How does Whitman stack up to something like Shakespeare, right? If you think Whitman's easier read than...
Whitman's easier than Shakespeare, definitely.
Definitely easier than Dickinson.
Yep.
Yeah.
Dickinson was our most challenging read of these.
Oh, for sure.
Yeah,
Dickinson made me question myself. My sanity.
There's probably going to be a fair amount of Dickinson on our test, by the way. So brace yourself for her. She's going to make some appearances.
She returned.
She returns from the attic. If you look on 1376, this is when these Whitman poems start. I've always liked the beat drums poem. Beat drums, blow, bugles, blow. Through the windows, through doors, burst like a ruthless force into the solemn church and scatter the congregation. Into the school where the scholar is studying. Leave not the bridegroom quiet. No happiness must he have now with his bride. Nor the peaceful farmer any peace, plowing his field or gathering his grain. So fierce you whir and pound I need new glasses. Whir and pound you drums, so shrill your bugles blow. Beat drums, blow, bugles, blow. Over the traffic of cities, over the rumble of wheels in the streets. Are beds prepared for sleepers at night in the houses? No sleepers must sleep in those beds. No bargainers bargains by day, no brokers or speculators. Would they continue? Would the talkers be talking? Would the singer attempt to sing? Would the lawyer rise in the court to state his case before the judge? Then rattle quicker, heavy your drums. You bugles wilder blow. Beat drums, blow bugles blow. Make no parley, stop for no expostulation. Mind not the timid, mind not the weeper or prayer. Mind not the old man beseeching the young man. Let not the child's voice be heard, nor the mother's entreaties. Make even the trestles to shake the bed where they lie awaiting the hearses. So strong you thump, O terrible drums, so loud you bugles blow. Right, so that poem, he uses repetition to make his point. Right? He keeps saying, blow, bugles, blow, beat, drums, beat. Right? Just showing how this noise pervades all of your daily life. Right? Lawyers can't talk, mothers can't scold their children. Right? People can't sleep. Singers can't sing, right? This is how much this war took over all of America, right? Constant noise, constant beats of the drum, of the war drums, right? That one's easy enough to wrap your mind around, I think, right? Just showing, you guys can only imagine how noisy it was, right? Living in I don't know, Maryland or something, right? Where all these war camps were, or Virginia or Pennsylvania. Yeah, so he still does his thing, right? He still makes his lists, right? The way that he liked to do in Song of Myself, right? Where he lists all these different people, right? He still does that. But it's very much a different style, a different tone to his work. I'm surprised this one wasn't in our book. I want to show you this one. This is pretty short, so I can read this one to you. This is a classic Whitman Civil War poem, Come Up from the Fields, Father. He says, come up from the fields, Father, here's a letter from our Pete. Come to the front door, Mother, here's a letter from my dear son. Lo, 'tis autumn, lo, where the trees deeper green, yellower and redder. Cool and sweet in Ohio's villages with leaves fluttering in a moderate wind. Where apples ripe in the orchards hang and grapes on the trellised vines. Smell you the grapes, the smell of the grapes on the vines? Smell you the buckwheat where the bees were lately buzzing? Above all, lo, the sky so calm, so transparent after the rain, and with wondrous clouds below too, all calm, all vital and beautiful, and the farm prospers well. Down in the fields all prospers well, but now from the fields come Father, come at the daughter's call, and come to the entry mother, to the front door come right away. Fast as she can, she hurries, something ominous, her steps trembling. She does not tarry to smooth her hair nor adjust her cap. Open the envelope quickly. Oh, this is not our son's writing, yet his name is signed. Oh, his strange hand writes for our dear son. Oh, stricken mother's soul. All swims before her eyes, flashes with black. She catches the main words only. Sentence is broken, gunshot wound in the breast, cavalry skirmish, taken to hospital. At present low, but will soon be better. Ah, now the simple figure to me, amid all teeming and wealthy Ohio, with all its cities and farms, sickly white in the face and dull in the head, very faint. By the jamb of a door leans. Grieve not so, dear mother, the just grown daughter speaks through her sobs. The little sisters huddle around speechless and dismayed. See, dearest mother, the lair says Pete will soon be better. Alas, poor boy, he will never be better. Nor may he needs to be better, that brave and simple soul. While they stand at home at the door, he is dead already. The only son is dead. But the mother needs to be better. She with thin form presently dressed in black. By day her meals untouched. Then at night fitfully sleeping, often waking. In the midnight waking, weeping, longing with one deep longing. All that she might withdraw unnoticed, silent from life escape and withdrawal. To follow, to seek, to be with her dear dead son. Right? Pretty sad poem.
Some heavy stuff.
Yeah, pretty. That poem definitely, I think, illustrates my point. Like that Whitman took on a different type of tone during the war compared to before the war. He does a masterful job there of putting you in the scene, right? You can kind of imagine like a small Ohio farm. You're out working on the farm. You know, you get a letter in. You think it's a letter from your son. Right? It's not. It's from a strange handwriting. You get that news. Right? You can kind of he puts you in that scene in that poem beautifully, I think. Now, so again, two different Whitmans. Like the Whitman after the war is very different. All these writers we're reading, most of them wrote after the war. Hawthorne and Poe didn't. Both of them died before or during the war. Melville and Whitman and Dickinson, all these writers lived well after the war. They always get lumped into this class, though, instead of part two, right? Because they're more commonly associated with those decades, I suppose. Any other thoughts about Whitman before we move on? I should also mention too Melville's poems. Shiloh is a very famous poem in the set that I gave you. That is on page 1571. I'll go over Shiloh really quick. Shiloh was a very bloody battle that happened in Mississippi during the war. It was one of the bloodiest battles too. I don't know as much about the Southern campaign and the Western campaign as I do the Virginia campaigns. They don't get talked about a lot compared to the Virginia campaigns. But it was a very bloody battle. You guys get a little bit of Melville the poet here. Very short lines. That's something to note. He says, skimming lightly, wheeling still, the swallows fly low over the field in clouded days, the forest field of Shiloh. Over the field where April rain solaced the parched one stretched in pain through the palls of night that followed the Sunday fight around the church of Shiloh. A church so lone, the long-built one that echoed to many a parting groan and natural prayer. Dying foemen mingled there, foemen at morn, but friends at eve. Fain were country, least their care. What like a bullet can undeceive? But now they lie low, while over them the swallows skim, and all was hushed at Shiloh. All right, so that's probably the most famous poem that Melville wrote. Very simple style, right, compared to even Whitman, right? Whitman's got those long sentences. Dickinson's so ambiguous, you don't know what she's talking about half the time, right? This is almost very clear and to the point, right?
More so in his novels, even to an extent.
Yeah, Bartleby goes 50-some pages, right? So does Benito Sereno, right? So he's a little bit more to the point here with his poems. He doesn't get talked about as a poet too much. I mean, even in our book here, he's only got 2 or 3 pages of poems. But just as equally talented there as he was with other things. Yeah, oftentimes that poem gets quoted a lot, Shiloh. I don't know if you guys have ever heard it before. But especially the day that battle happened, oftentimes you'll see like memorials about it in April. Right? That poem's often quoted to remember that battle. I think the poem's actually etched in like a monument somewhere at Shiloh, where the national park is now. Yeah, we made it to the Civil War, right? After that, well, that's for part 2 of American Lit, right? So, the decades after the Civil War, that's what I'm most specialized in as far as American Lit goes. I'm the 1880s, 1890s. That's my time. That's my time period as far as stuff that I know real well.
Is that the furthest what's the furthest date that, or the early or the latest author that you get into in that class?
Now you go all the way up to the present day in there. So like,
wow.
Yeah, like you go all the way up to fairly recent writers. So you spend a lot of time in the 1880s, 1890s, spend a lot of time in the 1920s and 30s, 40s. Right, so oftentimes when I teach that class, I spend a lot of time in the 1880s and then the 1930s. Like I know that stuff more than recent stuff. Getting me to read something that's less than 50 years old, and it doesn't happen much, right? So, right. That's definitely my biggest weakness is current fiction, right? I'm not as up on it as I should be.
Well, here's a question. So what is considered literature in the modern day? I mean, is it just Maya Angelou, or do you all throw Stephen King in there? Or, I mean, how does...
Tolkien.
Right. Well, recent writers that are still alive that get a lot of attention, like, well, Maya Angelou's not now, but Cormac McCarthy is a very famous writer. He wrote The Road and No Country for Old Men. He's very well respected. He's going to go down as almost like a Melville as far as like being a really famous novelist. Don DeLillo is another famous writer. He wrote a book called White Noise. Yeah, Stephen King probably has a place there. A lot, as far as like literature class goes, a lot of his shorter stories are read a lot compared to his novels. Of course, he has the problem too. If he produced a lot of good stuff early, but he's produced a lot of crap later in his career, right? So that kind of hurts him a little bit.
I feel like, when you look at modern times, like looking even like back at these times, like, a lot, or probably the majority, don't get really famous until after they're dead. It's probably going to be the case. There's probably going to be some crazy famous, writers come from today that we don't even hear about or recognize.
Yeah, I think you're exactly right, Danny. Plus, there's so much stuff out there now, right?
True.
I mean, even now, you're getting a lot of self-publishing and stuff like that, where people don't even have to go through a publisher anymore. Again, that invites the question: what is lit? How does it make it to lit? I asked you guys the question the first day: is Twilight lit? Right? 50 Shades of Grey lit? Right? Right? That book's horribly written, by the way. Like, if you want to watch something funny after class, look up Gilbert Gottfried reading 50 Shades of Grey on YouTube. It's really funny. It's really funny stuff. Right? Yeah. The really poorly written sexy lines in the book read.
Look up what?
Gilbert Gottfried reads like erotic passages from 50 Shades of Grey on YouTube. Right? Look it up. It's very good stuff. It will. I know you, Lisa. It will make you blush when you hear it, and laugh too. Right? It's 2 minutes. That's worth your time. Trust me.
Oh Jesus.
But it invites the question of if it's widely read at the time, does that make it lit? Told you guys before, William Sims wrote. He was one of the most popular writers of his day, and you never see him in a textbook now, right? Because of his Southern sympathies and stuff, right? But just making you well read, does that make it lit? Maybe so, maybe not. It all depends on your opinion on this very subjective question of what is lit. So to kind of go back full circle here. As far as this class goes, though, there's always new stuff being rediscovered. Just some final thoughts on the class before I go on to the test. But there's always new, even with this class, there's still new writers being rediscovered. Something that our book, the Norton Anthology, doesn't do a lot of is bring in a lot of like French and Spanish writers during the colonial period. And pretty much everything we read about colonial lit, besides Columbus, was English stuff. You guys all know there's a lot more going on in the Americas than just the English colonies. You had French colonies and you had Spanish colonies. So like there's a lot of like literature and translation that's now making it to our canon. They call that the transatlantic world, right? Because of the slave triangle, right? Europe to America to Africa. They call that the literature of the transatlantic world. So there's a lot of new writers that are being found that are being translated over to English from French or Spanish. There's a lot of work like that going on right now. There's some like old novels that are being dug up. One novel that has been dug up recently was called Secret History by Lenora Sansay. That book is about slavery in Haiti, around like 1812 or so. So that gives you a very much a different perspective on like race and slavery and stuff like that. Like that book does an interesting job talking about like even like all these different problems of race, like mixed races and stuff like that. That book gets heavy into that subject. That book's over the past 15 years, somebody dug that book up out of the archive, and now it's being widely read a lot in this class. I would have you read it, but I would have to go through a lot of bureaucracy to make you order another book. It's a very good book. If you guys are interested in another book, I would recommend a book called Shepherd Lee. That book was written in the 40s or 50s. I can't remember. It's about this guy who just like quantum leaps into different people's bodies and becomes them. Right. So like he leaps into like a Southern slave. He leaps into like all these different types of people in antebellum America. That book's made a comeback recently. Poe loved that book, Shepherd Lee. So I would recommend you check that one out. That's a pretty cool book. So again, I just named you two books off, but these are two books that over the past 10 years of American literary studies are now making some comebacks. Yeah, some young scholar recently, because we know Walt Whitman the poet, but some young scholar recently actually found a lost novel from Whitman in an archive somewhere. Right, that guy's career is now made. Right, just for discovering that. Right, he's probably going to be teaching at like Harvard or something. Right, just because he discovered that lost book from Whitman in some random dusty library somewhere. Right? This American lit is exciting, right? Just because there's always new stuff being found, new stuff's getting added. Compare that to British lit. Right? British lit, not much changes. Right? You have your Shakespeare, you have your Chaucer, you have your Milton, you have your Charles Dickens, your Jane Austen. Right? British lit doesn't change much. If you take this class 20 years from now, I guarantee you it will look much different than what we've done today. Right? I've given you very much a traditional American lit class. Right? Part of that's just because of the way the text of what the authors we have in our textbook. And I guarantee you 20 years from now, like let's say some of you guys have children and they take this class, like 20 years from now, for children or grandchildren, you take a look at their syllabus 20 years from now. I guarantee you a lot of the writers will be different just because this is a constantly changing field. So I wanted to leave you on that note too. Very, very much a growing and changing field. So let's get to the review for the test now. Review for the test. I'll put this up on Blackboard, of course, after class. I need to write the test still. I'll probably have the test up sometime tomorrow. What I'll probably do is I'll just enable it where you can take it whenever you want from now till Friday. But make sure that whenever you do take it, that you have an hour to do nothing. I give you 2 hours. Make sure you have two hours to do nothing but that test, because after 2 hours, it will time you out. So you definitely need to make sure when you do it, you have time and you're not going to be distracted. Okay. So you can take it anytime you want.
About how long do you think it should take us?
Nah, I give you 2 hours. Normally it takes like an hour and a half or so to do it all. Sometimes students finish real quick if you're real up on it. So there's some writing on the test in the form of the short answer questions. Those take the longest. It probably won't take you the whole time to do it. I wouldn't think. There's not going to be a proctor or anything like that. This is completely on the honor code. So nothing's stopping you from looking up the answer in the book, right? Nothing stopping you from that. But I trust that you won't, right? I will haunt you like the Grayling story, right? If you do that. So don't do it. Right, but you guys probably won't need to anyway. the way the test is designed, you could theoretically look up the answers, but you would be skimming through the stories so long that it would take you forever to find the answer. So that's kind of like, that's kind of how the test is designed anyway. Here's the sheet. Do you guys see the 201 terms from the entire course? Is that what you see?
Yeah.
So what you will do, you guys will log into Blackboard to take the test. Once it's up, you guys will see like a little link that you can go into to take the test. If you guys have ever had an online class before, it's pretty much the same as like taking a quiz or something on an online class. It's the same type of system. So I'll put in the announcement screen, it'll post a link to the test so that you can get into it. Remember, as soon as you start it, you got your 2 hour window. And I will post in the announcement screen as well, I will post this list of authors that we've read all summer. Like, I don't think you have to memorize every author we read. Right? I'm more interested in, can you match that author to the passage? I don't care if you memorize all the authors. So I will give you a list of the authors that you can use for the short answer questions. The way the test is going to be written, there's going to be 12. Let me look at how I did it for a spring semester for my Brit Lit class. Let me just look really quick. Give me a moment. I think I gave 12 multiple choice. Okay, so 30 points of the test will be multiple choice. 70 points on the test is going to be short answer. So that's how the test is going to work. 30 points, multiple choice, 70 points for short answer. And so multiple choice questions will be about stuff like literary terms. It'll be about stuff like, it'll have some history questions on there for you. It'll be stuff like that. Maybe questions about like, which of these was a Southern writer, right? It'll be questions like that in the multiple choice. The short answers will be famous passages that we've done. So from different stories. So in the short answer, what you'd have to do is you have to first identify the story and the author. So like maybe it's Columbus's first letter, right, where he talks about like the nightingales, for instance. Right, maybe I give you that one. So you would identify it as Columbus, his first letter. And then you give me a paragraph about the significance of that passage. So like, what was significant about that passage? What were the themes? What were the main ideas that the passage represented about whatever it is we talked about. Like, what's that passage's significance to American lit? So that's what you do in the analysis part after you've identified. So each one of these, I'm going to give you 10 multiple choice short answers. You only have to do 7 of them. So if you don't know one, there's some margin for error there. You can answer all 10, and I will grade the best of the 10. So if you don't feel sure about them, just answer another one, right? I will grade the best of the 10, but you only have to answer 7 of them. So you can just do 7 and leave the other 3 blank. You can do all 10, and I'll count the best 7. That's how it works. Okay. So pretty simple and explanatory enough, I think. You have your list of authors for doing the short answers. Okay. Some stuff I left off the test. Pretty much everything's on here, though. Like as you see with Melville, I'm not going to test you on Benito Sereno since we didn't get to cover it. I forgot to ask you guys what your thoughts on liking the iron mills was. I'll talk about it for a minute when we get to that part of the screen here. So I just have a bunch of like different ideas that we've talked about. I kind of came up with like a random list of ideas that I could remember us talking about during the course. As I said, I haven't written the test yet. So it's probably going to come from these ideas that I kind of randomly assembled before class today. But this one needs to be taken off because I used it. I took my previous sheet. But the first one we got here is the 8. So I'm not going to sit here and ramble for an hour myself. I'm going to turn the floor over to you guys. So you guys can explain some of this to me. The age of Jackson / Jacksonian democracy. So this is a history question, right? Remember before I talked about the Jacksonian age, Jacksonian democracy. Do any of you guys remember anything about that?
I don't remember. Jeez, it must have been real early.
Yeah, I'm not gonna lie. I'm kind of panicking, and I don't remember a whole lot of anything that we did. Because I mean, I'm gonna fail this test. I'll just tell you right now.
Nah, you won't.
I'm glad I'm not the only one, Lisa.
I'm done.
You won't. You'll be fine. So Jackson.
Literally, the only thing on here that I remember is Scarlet Letter.
I remember I would prefer not to. I mean, if I had my choice, I would prefer not to with this test.
But so that's my job today, to refresh you. So Jacksonian democracy was this idea perpetuated by Andrew Jackson, right? Remember I told you guys before, Jackson founded the Democratic Party. He founded it on the ideal of this is a party meant for the common person, right? This is a party meant for the common person. And by Jackson's definition of the common person, it was pretty much poor white farmers, right? His democracy, he wanted a government that was meant to help pretty much the poor white farmers, right? That's Jacksonian democracy, right? So I told you guys before, a lot of some of the changes Jackson did, like he deregulated the medical profession, for instance. Well, he did that because he didn't trust doctors. He thought that they were elitist, right? They thought they were better than everybody else. They know Latin, right? Oh, what snobs they are, right? So this was a government built for the interests of the common man, right? Jacksonian democracy. Well, as you guys know, the common man discludes a lot of people. Right? It discluded slaves. definitely discluded Indians in his America. I guess the Trail of Tears. Jackson sent the Cherokee tribes out west. Many of them died along the way. Right? So he wasn't very kind to the native peoples. Right? So a very limited democracy meant for the common white people. Right? All of us in the class would have done just fine in Andrew Jackson's America. Others, maybe not so much. Okay. The American melting pot in crevecoeur. I know you guys know this one. What's this one, Lisa? I know you remember this one. I want to pick on you, Lisa. What's the melting pot?
The melting pot, real? I don't know. It's just basically like all these different cultures coming together and kind of meshing together, ain't it?
That's right. Yeah, it's crevecoeur's idea, right? That it doesn't matter what culture you come from, Ireland or Africa or France or Germany or whatever, right? If you come to America, you have to give up your old habits, your old customs. You have to acclimate yourself to the American culture. You become part of the melting pot. You're melting away your old ideas. You're becoming something new and American. So Lisa hit that one on the head. I guarantee you that's going to be on there somewhere. Guarantee that, whether it's in a short answer or a multiple choice. That one will be on there somewhere. So that's one of the most, crevecoeur is one of the most influential texts we read in here. Right? That's a very important passage, even the understanding of what is America. American identity, things like that. I say here Anne Bradstreet's personal poetry and style. So if I give you a question about Bradstreet, it'll be a short answer. I can tell you that. If I give you a Bradstreet poem, it'll be a short answer. But a good way to remember that it's Bradstreet, well, a lot of her poems were very personal. Like, I don't know if you guys remember the poem about the burning of the house. Right? That's always one that sticks out to me from her collection, the poem about when her house burned down. Or the poem about her husband. Right? She wrote a lot of very personal types of poems. She's very unique in this class in that regard, because most of her other poets don't do that. So she writes a lot about domestic life. So if you see a poem on there about something like that, it's probably a Bradstreet poem. Okay.
Yeah, I remember that. The one I remember her now. She put a lot of emotion into it about her family, her kids, and that one about her unborn child. And yeah, she was a very lifetimey. Yeah.
Yeah. So I'm very vague there, but that's what I mean. So if you see a poem like that on here, just like how Danny said, it's probably one of hers. I'm not going to give you something like The Flesh and the Spirit. I remember that was one of our longer poems that was very abstract and religious. I won't give you that one, but I very well might give you one of her short poems. So on the short answers. I would be remiss not to, because Bradstreet's a very important author, our earliest good poet. The Bildungsroman in Franklin. So Bildungsroman is their $10 word for the day. That pretty much means a coming of age story. Right? So Franklin's autobiography is a Bildungsroman. It's a coming of age story. So that would probably come in the form of a multiple choice question. I might ask you, what is a Bildungsroman, or something like that. I might even say, what is a Bildungsroman? Best exemplified by Franklin's autobiography. That'll probably be what the question says. But remember, it's a coming of age story. That's a very common type of story, right? We still have Bildungsromans today, right? Where you get a hero or a character's coming of age. You get them from a child to an adult. Right? Bildungsroman. That autobiography helped innovate that genre. It's still here. I don't know if I did talk about that when we talked about the autobiography, but Bildungsroman is a coming of age story, so remember that. You guys all stop me along the way if I'm talking too fast or something, by the way. Don't hesitate to stop me. You guys know this. Chillingworth's glare in the Scarlet Letter. One of you guys tell me about Chillingworth's glare. This was only like 2 weeks ago. Remember Chillingworth and how he stares at Dimmesdale? Remember this? One of you guys tell me about it.
It was more like an obsessive stare.
Right. Very, very obsessive, very penetrating type stare, right? This is almost what makes Dimmesdale sick. Right? He's always having to put up with this guy obsessively staring at him all the time, right? It's very penetrative. It's very obsessive. Like when we talked about Chillingsworth a couple of weeks ago, we even asked ourselves, what did he do that was even that bad? Right? We asked ourselves that. He's overbearing, right? He's overbearing, over obsessive about his patient. He has a personal stake in his patient because Dimmesdale was who got with Hester, right, while she was married to Chillingworth. So if this shows up on the test in any form, it'll be a passage from the Scarlet Letter where it describes the glare that Chillingworth gives Dimmesdale. That's very likely to be on there, right? So if you get a passage about a glare, this obsessive stare or whatever, remember it's from the Scarlet Letter. It's Chillingworth. Okay. That's what made it so creepy. It's so weird, right? He's always skulking around or staring obsessively at Dimmesdale. City on the Hill. This is from week 1 of the class. Remember what City on the Hill is? John Winthrop.
Yeah, it's a place of transparency where people had accountability. They're as Puritans, I think.
All right. We're moving to America. We have to be held accountable, right? The eyes of the whole world are watching this. And we have to set a moral and spiritual example for the rest of the world to follow. Right? That's the city on the hill. America is like the city on the hill in the Bible. Right? So America is supposed to be a moral and spiritual leader for the rest of the world to follow. And this is a vision of America that still holds up today. This rhetoric about the city on the hill, politicians still use today, especially when they're like, yeah, America's great. We're the best country in the world, right? That a lot of that rhetoric stems from John Winthrop's City on the Hill speech. So I posted back in our week 1 module, I posted a Ronald Reagan speech where he used the city on the hill in his speech. Of course, Reagan, whether you love or hate Reagan, you have to admit he was a great speaker, right? He's somebody, when I teach speech class, I teach Reagan just because he was such a good speaker. So go back and watch that video if you want to see how that city on the hill rhetoric is used by politicians still today. Even the way America acts in international relations and stuff, right? Like we're always bossing around the Middle East or whatever, right? A lot of that stems from us trying to be the moral example for the rest of the world to follow. Americans definitely have a superiority complex in some ways. We Americans do, right? We're better than the rest of the world, right? A lot of countries don't like that. They think we're arrogant and smug. Civil disobedience in Thoreau and future followers. Let's remember Thoreau's text, Resistance to Civil Government, where he refused to pay his taxes because of his taxes went towards the Mexican War. He was against the Mexican War. So this was him peacefully protesting something that was going on in the country by refusing to pay his taxes. Well, that's a very influential text. Think about in the 20th century. You had Gandhi, who took up this example of peaceful protest against the British. You had Martin Luther King, who took up the peaceful protest mantra in trying to get more civil rights. He was a very peaceful man, right? He didn't want conflict. He didn't want people fighting in the streets. He wanted peace, peaceful protest. So something like when Rosa Parks didn't get up in the bus, right? That's an example of Thoreau's idea of civil disobedience. Thoreau is the one who came up with this idea that later people would use for political strategies or for political protest. Okay. I remember we debated that in this class. I think that was a debate on the discussion board. I remember you, Danny, talking about not paying your taxes was taking it a little too far. I remember reading that.
That was on my midterm. Yeah,
midterm.
Yeah, that was a discussion. Yeah, that was a Friday discussion. I just said, well, disobedience was. Yeah, I might have mentioned that in the post too.
Yeah, I remember that.
But I'm not sure. I think I might have changed my mind on that.
You think so?
Yeah, I think so. I'm allowed to because don't do foolish consistencies. Got to live in the present, you know.
Foolish consistency is the hobgoblin of little minds. Right?
Yeah,
that's what Emerson says. Yeah, so I think you guys all are up on that civil disobedience, what Thoreau meant. Martin Luther King's the best example I can give you of that. Gandhi too. Columbus and the Nightingale. Remember, back at the very beginning of the semester, we read Columbus's first letter. He talks about how beautiful the island is, all this stuff. He talks about
exaggeration.
He talks about the nightingale singing. Nightingales aren't even indigenous to the Americas, right? So he made that up, right? So, that's a passage showing like the beauty of the American wilderness, right? This is the idea of America as being in an Eden, as being a paradise, right? There's two visions of America, really. There's the vision of America as a paradise and America as a spiritual wilderness, right? Well, Columbus definitely had that idea with as it being an Eden, as it being a paradise.
He was trying to get his voyages funded by the king.
Right. He was a master car salesman, right? Columbus could definitely pawn a car off on you, I'm sure. Deism. Remember the deism? We talked about that with the founding fathers. Ben Franklin was probably our most famous. Jefferson too, were two famous deists. You guys remember what the theological thinking of deism was? Remember Ben Franklin was one?
Yeah, I think it was, oh, shoot. Like, believing in a supreme being, basically, but not conforming to any religion.
Exactly, right? You believe in that God created the earth. You don't necessarily subscribe to like a certain doctrine or whatever, but you do believe in a higher power. And it's this idea of God being the watchmaker, right? He invented the watch. Well, the ticking of the watch he doesn't have anything to do with. So that's actually a belief too, that God kind of checked out of human affairs. God doesn't have his hand involved in everything in human affairs. He set the universe up. He let the universe let the tick, right? People then make what they will. God doesn't have anything to do with what we do on a daily basis. That's the idea of deism too. He created the world. He doesn't really have anything else to do with it. But it's also a belief too that you don't subscribe to any doctrine. Ben Franklin and Jefferson both were deists. If I give you something about that, that might show up in the form of a short answer. All right, I could give you the passage from Ben Franklin, for instance, where he talks about deism. I could also give that to you in a multiple choice, make you define deism or something like that. So I can guarantee you that'll be on there somewhere.
Here's a question. If it is a short answer and we say that you believe in a higher power but not believing that they need to be in government, would that be considered correct, or does something seem added?
Say that again.
Believing in a higher power but believing that they do not need to be in government, is that something that would be considered correct, or?
Well, yeah, I mean, that was part of the deists, right? You know, they thought that Jefferson and Franklin both thought that deism helped bring about religious freedom. You're exactly right about that, Lisa. You know, these deists helped bring up this idea of religious freedom that the founding fathers very much believed in. Right? So you're 100% spot on there. Right? The deists definitely helped lead to the fact that we have religious freedom in this country. We're not a strictly Christian country, right? We have religious freedom. You can practice any type of Christianity you want. You can be a Buddhist, you can be a Hindu, you can be whatever, right? And we owe it to these deist thinkers for helping to bring that to motion. They were also skeptical too. They saw what a theocracy did in the Salem witch trials. They saw the dangers of that type of government. Rebecca Harding Davis in the realist form. I don't have time to talk about this in great detail. If you guys read that story for last Friday, the Life in the Iron Mills. That's a hugely influential story because it helped create a literary form called realism. But realism is very much different from something like the Scarlet Letter. Scarlet Letter is a romance. But realism is this type of fiction that's meant to take place strictly within reality, right? So the story you're telling is something that could happen. It's about the mundane, ordinary people of the world. Stories about the more ordinary and mundane. Oftentimes, realism has regional accents and dialects. You guys definitely saw that in Life in the Iron Mills. Like all these characters had some pretty thick accents. So realism's an easy enough term to define, right? Literature about the common, ordinary people and their lives. They even talk real. Right? Before that, you might have some backwoodsman talking like a Hawthorne character, right? Realism helped even bring about more realistic type of people that you're bringing about in fiction. That became a very popular genre after the war. But Rebecca Harding Davis's Life in the Iron Mills is one of the best early examples of that genre. If you take part 2 of this class, realism, something you talk about in the first 2 or 3 weeks, right? Just because it became that big after the war. The style of Emily Dickinson. I say Emily Dickinson's style here because if I post a Dickinson poem and put it as a short answer, I might do something like the Sabbath poem, or I might do the one where death picks her up at her door, right? You guys remember these poems we talked about. It doesn't matter which one I give you though, so long as you can identify Dickinson's style, you can identify that it's Dickinson. And then you can break the poem down from there. You guys remember her style? She's got these really short lines. She has weird capitalizations. She also uses dashes. The use of the dash is something that we talked about a lot when we were trying to break her down. So if you see a poem on this test with a dash, you better bet it's a Dickinson poem, probably. Right? I won't. If let's say Whitman happened to use a dash once, right? I won't give you that, right? If there's something with a dash on here, you better bet it's a Dickinson poem.
And we paused. I think we paused when we seen the dash.
Right. Yeah. That's a brief moment of pause. It meant to make you reflect on what you just read before. So short lines, weird capitalizations, and dashes. Right. That's a pretty clever clue that it's Dickinson. So if I give you a Dickinson poem, you can identify it based on her style. And then, like when you get to the analysis, you can talk about her style. Right. She helped innovate this style. You can also break down the poem if you want. Right. But this poem about going to the church, keeping my Sabbath on Sunday at home, right? It's this idea that you don't have to go to church to worship God at home, right? You'd say something like that. So you better bet a Dickinson poem will be on here. You can identify it based on her style. I got 2 Douglas points on here, Douglas and literacy. So remember the power of literacy in the master and slave relationship, right? The masters did not want the slaves to learn how to read because that would give them ideas about revolting. They would be able to read these abolitionist pamphlets and whatnot. They would then know their worth. So keeping a slave in the dark, keeping them from being able to read, was a lot of how they held power over their slaves. Remember that Douglas's first mistress in the sense of his master's wife, right? She tried to teach him how to read, and he got mad at the wife. The master got mad at the wife for her trying to teach him that because it might give him ideas. We know she only got about halfway there, but Douglas was smart. He helped figure out how to read the rest of the way. She helped plant the seed. She didn't fully take him there, but he learned how to read by observing, by asking like questions about something. Like he learned how to read very subtly after that, if you remember. So if there's a passage on here about that, it'll be in a short answer. It'll be about that issue, slaves and being able to read. Douglas and Mr. Covey, I made mention of that earlier. That's a key passage in American Lit, the passage where Douglas flips the master and slave dynamic between master and slave. He becomes Covey's master at that point, right? Covey no longer has any power over him after he breaks him. Right? So he flips the script. on the master and slave relationship. That's when that's probably the moment where Douglas is most self-reliant in the whole story, right? Beautiful moment in American Lit. That's one of the key. That's definitely one of the key passages we read all summer. So I guarantee you that will be on the test. I guarantee it. That passage will be on there. Hawthorne and the Puritan origins vision of American Lit. Remember that Hawthorne wrote about the Puritans because his ancestors were ashamed, because his ancestors were part of the Salem witch trials. All right, so that's part of why he always paints Puritans in this sort of negative light. So if I give you something like this, it might be in the form of a multiple choice. I might ask, like, which author that we read had ancestors who were Puritans, and that helped, which helped to lead to some of his fiction. Right. So you guys all know that's Hawthorne, based off the Scarlet Letter. Right. The Scarlet Letter is extremely critical of Puritans. The Headless Horseman, that's pretty self-explanatory. Remember, that's from the Legend of Sleepy Hollow, which was one of our Friday discussion readings. You guys all know the Headless Horseman's influence in pop culture, right? You still see it everywhere at Halloween time, right? But the story is also very much about like local legends and folk tales and things like that, which is extremely important. All these local legends and whatnot. The story is a masterclass of setting too. Like Irving really does well establishing setting. So there might be a question about the Headless Horseman on there. I would prefer not to. Bartleby the Scrivener by Melville. Right. We just covered that last week, so I don't really have to go too into depth about that. Remember, that's Bartleby's words, and it helps shut down the entire office that he's at. They missed a chance in the show The Office. They should have had a character do this. Right? They missed their chance in that show. The Jeremiad and Mary Rowlandson. So here's another literary term for you. A Jeremiad is a lament. You're lamenting something. You're lamenting the state of affairs, right? You're talking. You're almost like wailing, right, about how awful things are. Right? That term comes from the book of Jeremiah in the Bible, where Jeremiah, Jeremiah, of course, I think is when Israel had been taken over again. I might be wrong. I might not be fresh on that. But it comes from that. The term comes from that book. So Rowlandson's captivity narrative is a Jeremiad. Right? She talks about her struggles, how unfair it is, like that she was taken away from her home, and how her kid died, and all this stuff. That's an example of the literary term Jeremiad. So I might ask you a question in a multiple choice about what's a Jeremiad or something like that. Okay. And when I search Jeremiad on dictionary.com, it says a long, mournful complaint or lamentation, a list of woes. A list of woes, a long, mournful complaint or lamentation. That's definitely that's definitely Rowlandson, right?
That just pretty much is like a rant, like a rant talking about how messed up things are, pretty much. Just
right. There's still examples of Jeremiads today, right? As far as like documentaries you might watch that show how awful things are, right? There's no shortage of Jeremiads even today. That's that term. That's what that term means. The Political Poetry of Lydia Sigourney. Oh, well, I need to go back to our screen here. I accidentally X'd it out. With the Political Poetry of Lydia Sigourney. If I give you a Sigourney poem on here, remember that she was very upfront about her politics. Right? Her poems are almost Jeremiads. That's kind of interesting that they go back to back there. But she's very critical of stuff. She's critical about how they treated Indians. She's critical about how they treated slaves. She's important because she wrote a lot of these poems before it became mainstream to do so. Like the 1840s, 1850s is when abolitionists really took off. And that became a mainstream thing. So if you see a Sigourney poem on here, she's got a real simple style. But remember, like, she's really one of the only poets we read that really gets knee deep into politics and the political issues. Right? Whitman does somewhat, but not really. I mean, like he'll cover like gay people, or he'll talk about how he saw a slave, how he kept the slave, how he gave him a place to stay on his way up north. Right? He talks about that. But his poems don't have a political message or subtext to them. Like Sigourney's did. I remember we talked a lot about Sigourney several weeks ago. I remember we spent a lot of time talking about her at the beginning of class several weeks ago. I think it was the day we talked about Whitman. You guys all liked Sigourney, I remember. You guys all gravitated to her more than you did William Colin Bryant. I remember you guys all like Sigourney better than William Colin Bryant. So if you see a poem on there and it seems preachy, it has a political preachy message, it's probably a Sigourney poem. Remember what her innovation was. She did all this before it became mainstream. Also, female poets, right? Early female poets. You know, Bradstreet and Sigourney both. We read lots of good women poets and Dickinson in this class. The mythology of John Smith and Pocahontas. I don't really have to go too knee deep into this. Right? You guys all, we talked about how John Smith's actual story wildly differs from the mythology of John Smith that's most perpetuated by Disney from the Pocahontas movie. Right, so I might give you a question. I might give that passage where Pocahontas saves John Smith as a short answer question. That would probably be a good place where that would show up, I would imagine. Poe and innovations in detective fiction. Remember that story, The Purloined Letter, is a case of early detective fiction. Like Poe and Arthur Conan Doyle over in England who wrote the Sherlock stories, both of them were the early innovators of the detective stories. Now that might show up in a multiple choice. Like which author we read helped innovate the detective genre. Right? Edgar Allan Poe.
What was the detective? Oh, I could look it up. But what was that detective story we read by him again?
The Purloined Letter.
Okay.
Yeah, it was about the letter that was hidden in plain sight. Right. Poe and innovations in Gothic fiction. Remember that his biggest innovation was the first person point of view. Right? He helped incorporate the first person unreliable narrator into his stories. I remember Lisa especially was a fan of that. Right? She thought that helped like create a lot more suspense in the stories if you didn't really know what was going on through the narrator's mind. The Telltale Heart is probably the best example of that, right? Because what he hears these noises of the heart beating through the floor. Right? You guys know, he's losing it. So like how much of reality is actually going on during the story? So there might be a question about about that here. Self-reliance, that's Emerson's idea, right? There's lots of, remember when we talked about Emerson, we talked about the magnet quotes, right? Emerson was the master of magnet quotes. Remember, self-reliance is part of transcendentalism. Right? It's this idea that we should separate ourselves from the mainstream. Right? That applies to almost Thoreau was who helped perfect this idea in a way. Right? And Walden, as he said, Thoreau said, "Why do we have to wear the fancy clothes? Why do we have to buy a fancy house? I can build a house for cheap. Like, why do we have to conform to the fashions of the time? Non-conformity, right? That's a key part of being self-reliant. So that could show up anywhere, right? I could bring up Thoreau here. I could bring a passage in from Emerson, where Emerson talks about it. So if it's Thoreau, remember Thoreau was Emerson was more abstract about the idea, right? Whereas Thoreau kind of helped bring the idea into practice. Remember we talked about in Walden. Emerson gave lots of good ideas. That's all he did, right? He gave the ideas, and Thoreau helped put his ideas into practice by living alone at Walden. He still went home on the weekends to do his laundry at Mom's house, though. Right? He didn't tell you that. Right? That's actually true. I'm not being facetious. He did go home on the weekends to do his laundry at Mom's house.
He already also still went out and ate sometime and sometimes in town at restaurants.
Yep. Yeah, he does talk about that a little in there. He talks about going to town sometimes. Sims and the politics of literary canon formation. Remember, Sims was our Southern writer, right? He was wildly popular at the time. He's not in our book. Right? Why is he not in our book? Because he was a slave-owning sympathizer of the institution of slavery, right? So he doesn't fit the standards of today, right? That's part of why he's not taught much. He's not a politically correct writer. I might ask you a question about that in like the multiple choice or something. Like, which of our writers was a Southern writer who wasn't in our book or something like that? Slavery and the Founding Fathers, Jefferson and Crevecoeur. I could give you all kinds of passages and notes on Virginia from Jefferson, right, where he talks about like why Black people should be slaves, like what characteristics make them slaves, all this stuff. So he helped kind of create a lot of these myths, right, about why do Black people make good slaves compared to, let's say, Native Americans. He didn't believe Native Americans would be good slaves at all. He goes into that in that Notes on Virginia we read. Right? Remember, he talks about their skin secretions and their smells and their ability to sing and their ability to work long hours in the sun and all this stuff. Right? He goes into all that in a very scientific way. So I might give you a question about that, Jefferson's ideas about slavery. Right? He also has that passage where he says, I tremble thinking about slavery, right? Thinking about what it's going to do to this nation. He was very much a human contradiction when it came to slavery. Right? He had slaves. He thought it was evil, but he had them anyway. Right? And remember Crevecoeur in Letters from the Farmer actually went to South Carolina and he saw these slaves, what happened with these slaves. Remember, he saw the slave hanging, right? Remember how that kind of haunted him, right? So Crevecoeur was a very much an early anti-slavery sort of founding father. He talks about how lazy the people in the South are, right? Because he talks about how hot it is. That makes them eat like one big meal a day, at night and all this stuff, right? So remember, Core was very hostile to slavery. That's something all the founding fathers had different opinions on this. Ben Franklin had his opinions on it. Washington had his opinions on it. John Adams was probably the most anti-slavery person there was. But from our class, at least, Jefferson is who we got a lot of discourses on slavery about. The Civil War, major causes, the Civil War and violence. I'm not going to go into that because I just did earlier in the class. There might be a multiple choice question about those. I might be really facetious and ask what was the major cause of the Civil War. If you put anything other than slavery on the question, I'm going to drive to your house and glare at you like Chillingworth. Okay, so don't circle anything but slavery, or I will come glare at you like Chillingworth. That's a promise. Okay. No matter what a certain history teacher here at Southern might tell you, that was the cause of the Civil War.
If you stare at us with that eye, we could come back as Poe.
That's right. That's right.
So you might want to watch that.
Well, I won't murder you like the Telltale Heart. I won't go that far. But I'll at least stare at you creepily. Okay. Yeah, so let's see, where was I? The Grayling and Enlightenment philosophy. Remember the Sims story, the Grayling? Like part of the conflict of that story was like, what do you believe? Do you believe science when it comes to something like ghost stories? Or do you believe superstition? Like, what makes for a good ghost story? So remember that opening paragraph of the Grayling was where where Sims really like develops that theme. If that shows up, it'll be in the short answers. Okay. This idea of, can we tell a good ghost story in the age of science? Like, can we do it? The mudsill theory, we talked about that last week. Remember, the mudsill theory was this idea that all societies have a class of people who have to do the dirty jobs, right? Hammond argued that in the South, that was slaves, but in the North, that was the factory workers who were paid like slaves. So what's worse, he said. He really kind of pointed the hypocrisy of the North out a little bit with that theory. But that's what the theory is about. Like, every society has a class, capitalist society has a class of people who did the dirty work. Right? We talked about how that applies even today to like different types of workers, like restaurant workers or hotel workers and things like that. I remember we talked about that last week. We talked about that with Bartleby, right? Because Bartleby was doing this type of work that nobody else wanted to do, right? Who would want to be a human copying machine? The Scarlet Letter is a symbol, right? Remember how Hester kind of owns the Scarlet Letter, right? At first, it's a symbol of, oh, she's an adulterer. As the story goes on, the symbol's meaning changes, right? It very much changes. She even becomes almost like a saint close to the end of the story. And remember like the changing meaning of the symbol in the Scarlet Letter as the story goes further on. That might show up in like a short answer kind of deal. There might be more than one passage from the Scarlet Letter on the test. I will say that. Okay. I won't give you multiple passages from the same author much. Like with Whitman and Dickinson, I'll probably only give you one question about like one of those. I won't give you two Whitmans or two Dickinsons or something like that. But I will give you two. I probably will give two Hawthorne questions. That's the only one I'll do that to you too. Okay. The spider and sinners in the hands of an angry God. If that shows up, it'll be a short answer. Remember, in the sinners in the hands of an angry God, he talked about how humans are like we hold a spider over a fire ready to drop it in, right? That's how God is with us, right? He hates us just like how we hate a spider. He's ready to drop us in the fire anytime he pleases, right? If that shows up, that's meant to show, hey, this was during the Puritan era, right? He actually wrote that in this age of, secularism, right? The Great Awakening. He was trying to awaken interest back into the church by in part scaring people to death into being Christians. Jefferson on race, we already talked about that above with the founding fathers and slavery. Jefferson on religious freedom. Remember, that was Jefferson wrote the Virginia Statutes of Religious Freedom. So if I give you a question on the test, which of the fathers is most responsible for the idea of religious freedom? Well, that's definitely Jefferson, right? He was our founding father who helped give us freedom of religion, and that's why that's in the First Amendment to the Constitution. Can't discriminate based on religion, right? You're free to practice any religion you want. I don't know if you guys know, but if you go to Jefferson's grave today, it has three things on his grave. It says Jefferson, the founder, the writer of the Declaration of Independence. I remember two of them. Let me Google it real quick just to refresh myself. Yeah, he wrote, his grave says, author of the Declaration of Independence, founder of the University of Virginia, and author of the Statute of Virginia for Religious Freedom. Those were the three things he felt most proud about in his life to put on his grave. Well, what's missing there? What notable life accomplishments missing on the grave?
President,
right? Jefferson's presidency was kind of disastrous. Right? I don't remember talking about that, but he didn't have the greatest presidency. He wasn't as pleased about that as he was about those other things. He did do the Louisiana Purchase, so we owe him that at least. Thoreau and simplicity. We talked about that with self-reliance above. That's part of self-reliance, right? Being simple. You don't need the fancy jewelry or the fancy clothes or the fancy shoes. You can live a simple life. That's part of that fancy furniture, right? That's part of the idea of Walton. The transcendentalist philosophy as a whole, right? The definition of that, right? Things like nonconformity, right? Self-reliance, nonconformity. That's very much simplifying what transcendentalism means, but know what it means for the test. You guys all know what it means. You've read the stuff. The transparent eyeball in Emerson. Remember, that's a key part of his essay, Nature, right? He says, he goes into the woods. He then becomes the transparent eyeball. He sees all. The kern of the universal being comes through me. I am part of God. Right? That was the transparent eyeball passage. Mostly that passage is about nature, right? It's about how we all come closer to God and our spirituality by going out into nature. You actually have a better relationship with God out in nature, maybe compared to doing it mainstream style. I guarantee you that passage is going to be on here. Review that passage in the book of Nature. essay Nature, the transparent eyeball passage. It will be on there. Typology in Mary Rowlandson. Typology is how she uses Bible verses all the time to prove her points. Right? Remember, she's always like using Bible verses to show like how she felt, what she felt during a certain time while she was being captured by the Indians. She read a certain verse and it gave her some peace. Right? Typology is the literary term for that, where you constantly like use scripture to balance it, to prove your points. Typology is what that's called. Then Whitman's Civil War poems. We talked about that today. Whitman's free verse. Remember, free verse is unrhymed iambic pentameter. So Whitman helped innovate the unrhymed poetry form, right? If it wasn't for Whitman, right, somebody surely would have done it at some point. He was one of the first people to do that. He said, "Why are we still rhyming our poems like old stuffy British people? We don't need to do that anymore. Let's make our own poetry." Emerson called for a unique American lit, right? Whitman answered the call, right? He said, "I'm doing it. I'm writing poetry that doesn't rhyme." Remember, he even wrote his letter to Emerson, right, that he published in his book. Emerson didn't like that too much. Whitman's poetry of democracy. Remember, he tries to represent everybody of all sexualities and skin colors and all this. We talked partly about, could he do that as like a white dude? We actually had that discussion. Was he able to do that? Did he succeed at doing that? Some of you didn't think so. Some of you did. That was something that the class was kind of divided on. But that was his project. He hoped to do it. And William Colin Bryant and the Mound Builders. Remember that poem, The Prairies, right, which was about the mound builders, like this race of Indians who were here even, not even calling Indians, they were the race of people here before the Indians, right? And they were the ones who built those like mounds, which are almost like little pyramids, right? He talks about, he kind of like romanticizes them, right? Talking about how there are people long extinct, and things like that. There's actually mounds here in West Virginia somewhere, I think, from those mound builders that you can visit today, by the way. It's a fun fact for you. So that was a hell of a lot of stuff to cover, right? But how do you guys feel now? You were feeling insecure when I started this. How do you feel now?
I mean, I might not get an A, but it probably ain't going to be a raging A.
Right. Somebody say something else?
I still don't feel good about it.
You still don't?
No, I'm just going to shoot it straight.
Well, the good news is you'll have this recording that you can review before you take the test if you want. So this isn't the only time you'll hear it. You will have the recording.
I think I'll do all right. Yeah. I won't do good, but I'll pass.
I'm sure all of you will do well with this. Like I said, from teaching many different literature courses over time. It's mostly A's and B's. Then I get failing grades. I don't even really get C's on these. It shows me who's read stuff, who hasn't. Right? That's what this test does. It tells me, it shows who's read stuff and who hasn't. So if you've kept up with your reading all summer, you're going to do fine on this test. The data says as much from my previous classes. Okay.
I just can't like comprehend stuff and like keep it. Like I can read it and I can remember it for a couple of days and then I have to go back and read it again just to remember what I was doing days ago.
Right. So in review, it wouldn't hurt then to go back and like read some of these passages again, right? To refresh yourself on them for sure. Like the Emerson transparent eyeball thing I was talking about a minute ago, right? Go back and review that passage. That way when you see it, you'll know who it came from. So, yeah. If nothing else, I hope this review helped lead you to going back and looking up some of these passages again and all this stuff. Okay. Other questions, comments, concerns, anything at all I can address at the moment? I still got the second short paper to get back to you. I'm going to work on those tomorrow. Hopefully get those back. I know that I've got a couple of revisions in I need to look at too. So I'm going to be finalizing that stuff over the next few days. Hopefully by Friday, I will have your final grade ready after I grade this test. Okay. I'm going to put Friday, let's say Friday by, let's say 8 o'clock-ish. That's when the test is due. Okay, so Friday around 8 o'clock, take it before then. Okay, because when I get home that night, I'm going to grade those and finalize your grade on Friday night. Okay. So make sure you have it in by then. You can take it any time between when I enable the test after I write it and then. Okay. You just can't take it in 2 bursts. You have to do it all in 1 burst. So you guys will do great. I know you will. Anything else before we call it a night?
Yeah, I do want to say something.
Okay.
I very much dreaded this class because it's, I don't know, to me, you hear literature and you think boring and stuffy, but I want you to know that I have absolutely loved this class, and I'm going to miss Tuesday.
Right.
I just felt you needed to know that, and I hope that you have a very good wedding and you all a lifetime of love.
I appreciate that, Lisa. That means a lot. Yeah, I always like hearing these things and knowing that you guys are enjoying what I do. So.
Yeah, I feel the same way. I enjoyed it too. I kind of had a last semester. I took a literature course and had a pretty bad, I had a rough experience. So I kind of had I don't know, it just left a bad taste in my mouth. I thought that's just kind of how, I just got a lot of meaning out of this class. So, yeah, I enjoyed it too. And a lot better than I enjoyed it a lot more than I ever imagined. I'll say that, definitely.
Yeah. I have too. I've actually had fun. Every time me and Lisa get off of Tuesdays, we're like texting each other like, oh my God, I really enjoy this class. I'm going to miss it when it's over. So.
Yeah, well, this class is what I went to school to do, actually. Like I teach stuff like English 101, 102. This is my field. Like this is what I've done all my research and scholarship on. So it means a lot to me to be able to teach it to you guys. This is what I'm passionate about. So I told Danny before class, a literature class, the professor's job is the easiest thing to do. All I got to do is get you guys to talk. But a good literature class is the foundation is the students who are in it, right? So all of you guys put 100% effort in, and that makes for a good class. So this class wouldn't have been good without you all. So I wanted you all to know that. So I've had disastrous literature classes before that nobody talks. That makes for a hard time. Right? You guys, no shortage of discussion in here. I always appreciate that.
Next time you get one like that, just invite me and Lisa. We're never
Yeah, so
physically don't know how to shut up.
That's not a bad thing. That's not a bad thing in my opinion. All right, so thank you guys for that. Make sure you leave me a review on Blackboard. Make sure you do that. Those kinds of things do help me out. So if you got good things to say or constructive criticisms too, please leave those on.
I can say a lot for extra credit.
I can consider that. I'm not open. I'm open to bribery. Right? So.
I was trying to do that earlier today. Actually, I was wanting to do that for you, and I couldn't. I went into my Southern, but I couldn't really find out exactly how to do it. It's different than Concord.
You do it on Blackboard.
Oh, okay.
Yeah,
I got you.
Yeah, not my Southern. You do that on Blackboard. Just log into a class on there, and you should be able to do it on there.
Is that the end of course evaluation thing?
Yeah.
Is that what that is?
Yeah.
Okay. I'm new to this whole Blackboard thing anyway, so I don't know hardly nothing.
Well, Southern's going to change from Blackboard in spring semester. We're going to something else, which is annoying. So.
Are you kidding me?
Nope, I'm not. We're moving to some other program. So I've finally gotten comfortable with teaching online classes, and now I have to go to a new software. So it's great.
That's the way it goes.
Yeah. All right, guys.
If there was an award for the most straightforward answer, Sydney, you have to get it.
Right.
She is so hilarious, though. She don't even know what I'm talking about her. Look at her. Her internet messed up. There she is.
Yeah, my phone is about to die.
If there was an award for the most straightforward, I mean, it would be you.
That's what everybody tells me. That's what people voted for me in high school.
Well, you know what? That's not a bad thing, because whenever you leave people, you know exactly where you stand. They know where you stand. But I'm telling you, me and Lisa has even mentioned, like, I would love for Cindy to come and work with us at a school. So if you're looking for a job, you hit us up.
Definitely.
You want to work with little kids, you hit, well, all the way from K to 12, you hit me up, because I think you'd fit in good.
Definitely.
Kayla, I hope your wedding goes wonderful this weekend.
Yeah, definitely, Kayla.
Well, thank you. You too, Dr. Yeager. Hope everything's smooth and goes good. Stress-free.
All the plans driving you crazy.
Yeah. Definitely going insane. I'm calm but insane in the head at the same time. Everywhere.
Yeah, me too. We're in the same boat.
I think I'm still having trouble finding your the evaluation thing here. I went to let me see.
You know the list on the left of the screen that's got like the discussion and your grades and stuff?
Yeah.
It should be like the last one on that list.
Okay, I got you.
Yeah, when you first log in to Blackboard, it says evaluation kit, course evaluations. I think you click on that and that takes you in. Man, make sure you always do that for all your professors, whether good or bad. I mean, it's important stuff to know. All right, guys. I appreciate you all. It's been a good summer. I've really enjoyed it. So take care. If you all need me for anything in the future, you have my email. So I'll be happy to write any of you guys letters or anything like that if needed. Okay.
Don't fail us too hard.
Nah, there's not going to be any failing in here.
He would prefer not to.
I prefer not to.
We'll never be able to hear that without thinking of each other.
Yeah. All right, guys. Enjoy. Good luck on the test. You guys will do fine. See you later.
See y'all.
Bye, everybody.